This is presentation 9 of the 2013 ELA Assessment Scoring Series. In this presentation, we're going to look at the Grade 4 Extended Response or 4-point guide set. You're going to need to have a copy of the Grade 4 to 5 rubric and the guide set. If you don't have those, please download them from e2ela.wikispaces.com/scoring. There are two passages at the beginning of the guide set. The first one's a myth. The second one's a piece of informational text. Please pause the presentation now and carefully read those two. When we return, we'll take a look at the scoring of the student responses. The students were asked to respond to this question. The myth and the article both provide explanations for why evergreen trees keep their leaves in the winter. How are the explanations similar and different? Use specific examples from the myth and the article to support your answer. In your response, be sure to do the following. Describe what the myth says about why evergreen trees keep their leaves in winter. Describe what the article says about why evergreen trees keep their leaves in winter. Discuss how the explanations are similar and different, and include details from both the myth and the article to support your answer. Guide paper 1 is the first of the 4-point response examples. In this paper, the student wrote, "The myth says that the evergreen trees keep their leaves in winter because they helped a little bird. The bird had a broken wing. None of the other trees would help her out by letting her live on their branches, but when the bird was trying to fly away, she heard a voice. It was the spruce tree. The spruce tree helped the little bird out along with the juniper and pine. The article says that the evergreens keep their leaves in winter because they're able to shed snow, and also their dark color helps keep them warm in the cold. They are able to shed snow because they have a cone-shaped tree allowing them not to break when the snow is covering it. Their dark color keeps them very warm in the cold, icy winter. Two ways the article and the myth are similar is they both include the pine, spruce, and juniper. Also, because they both said that evergreens are able to survive the winter. They are different because in the myth it was a spruce, pine, and juniper tree helping a little bird, and therefore they got a gift to be able to keep their leaves. In the article, it was the tree being able to keep its leaves all year long. Another way they are different is in the myth, it involves other trees not letting the bird live on their branches. In the article, it doesn't involve other trees. This was scored as a 4. The best way to look at that is to take a look at your rubric as you're looking at the paper. First of all, the response clearly introduces a topic in a manner that follows logically from the task and the purpose, and the response demonstrates insightful comprehension and analysis of the texts. Those are both characteristics of level 4 of content and analysis. Also, the topic is developed with relevant, well-chosen facts from the texts, and varied relevant evidence is sustained throughout. Those also are level 4s of the command of evidence. When you take a look at the coherence, organization, and style, the response exhibits clear, purposeful organization and skillfully links ideas using grade-appropriate words and phrases, and the language is stylistically sophisticated. Finally, if you take a look at the conventions, the response demonstrates grade-appropriate command of conventions with few errors. So this paper was rated a 4 in every single criterion. It's not necessary that a paper be rated 4 in every single criterion to get a 4, but in this case, the student does it. Guide paper 2 is the second 4. The student writes, "The myth says evergreen trees keep their leaves because the evergreen trees were being good to the birds, so the king made the wind stay away from the evergreen trees. Since the other trees were being mean to the bird, the king let the wind go and blow their leaves off. The article says evergreen trees keep their leaves because the small pointy leaves and the cone-like shape of the tree itself shed snow more easily than the other trees. So the evergreens are not as likely to break under the weight of snow and ice. By having a lot of small leaves packed with chlorophyll, the plant gathers as much energy as it can from the sparse sunlight. It uses this energy to make food in the form of glucose. The dark color also helps keep the plant warm in its cold environment. They are different because the myth is telling a story that not all people think is true. Then the article is giving the facts that you can prove they are right. They are similar because they are both giving information on the trees. Guide paper 2 is scored as a 4. The response clearly introduces a topic in a manner that follows logically from the task and the purpose, and the response demonstrates insightful analysis of the texts. Again, if you look at that, that's in the 4 column under Content and Analysis. Under Command of Evidence, the topic is developed using relevant, well-chosen facts and concrete details from the texts. The response exhibits clear, purposeful organization and skillfully links ideas with great appropriate words and phrases. The language is stylistically sophisticated with domain-specific vocabulary. The response provides a concluding statement that follows from the topic and the information presented. Those, again, are all features of a Level 4 paper, in this case in coherence, organization, and style. Finally, the response demonstrates great appropriate command of conventions with few errors. Once again, every element we looked at in this paper was a 4. Now we're going to take a look at Guide Paper 3. This is the first of the 3-point responses. The myth says evergreen trees keep their leaves in the winter because the trees who have been good to the bird may keep their leaves. The article says the evergreen trees keep their leaves in the winter because the cold climate where evergreens live means that even if there's a lot of rain, the water is often frozen and unavailable to the plant. The small area and the thick coating of wax on the needle-like leaves allow the plant to retain the water. The myth and the article are similar because both tell ways of how evergreen trees keep their leaves in winter. The myth and the article are different because the article tells how evergreen trees keep their leaves in the winter, describing how evergreens keep their leaves. The myth just tells of how evergreens keep their leaves and putting parts of facts into that story. This paper was scored as a 3. The response clearly introduces a topic in a manner that follows from the task, and it demonstrates great appropriate comprehension and analysis of the texts. Those are both 3s in Content and Analysis. The use of relevant evidence is sustained throughout, also a 3. The response exhibits clear organization and links ideas using grade appropriate words and phrases. The language is grade appropriate with domain-specific vocabulary, and the response demonstrates grade appropriate command of conventions with occasional errors that do not hinder comprehension. Guide Paper 4 is the second of the 3-point papers. The myth says the evergreen trees are nice to the bird. Because they are nice, the forest king told the wind only to touch the mean trees. The article says the evergreen trees don't lose their leaves because they are adapted to the climates where there is limited sunshine and limited water. The answers in the stories are the same and different because in the first story they keep their leaves because of kindness, but in the second story the leaves stay on because the trees are adapted to the cold climate. And the reason the answers are the same is because they both keep their leaves. The student is scored a 3 in this response because the response clearly introduces a topic in a manner that follows from the task and purpose, and it demonstrates great appropriate comprehension and analysis of the texts. The topic is only partially developed with some textual evidence. That's more evident of a Level 2 paper, but it does exhibit clear organization and links ideas using grade appropriate words and phrases. There's a concluding statement that follows from the topic and the information presented. The grade appropriate command of conventions with occasional errors is evident. So most of the scores that the student receives are 3s. Holistically, the paper is scored as a 3. Guide Paper 5 is the first of the 2s. The student writes, the leaves of the evergreen stay on because the forest king told the wind not to touch the trees that were helping the little bird. The leaves of the evergreen stay on because they store food in their leaves. The stories are similar because they both tell you that they do lose their leaves, just not at the same time. They are different because one is fiction and the other is nonfiction. That paper is scored as a 2. The response introduces a topic in a manner that follows generally from the task and purpose, and it demonstrates a literal comprehension of the texts. The topic is partially developed with the use of some textual evidence, and there's some attempted organization, but there's an inconsistent use of words and phrases to link ideas. There's no concluding statement, but the student does demonstrate great appropriate command of the conventions with occasional errors. They don't hinder comprehension, so the student is a little bit stronger in the conventions, but overall scored as a 2. Guide paper 6 is another 2. The myth says that the wind asked if he could blow the leaves off of the trees, and the king of the forest said no. In the article, it said that wax helps, and it's dark color too. The way that they are both the same is that they both explain the same thing, but in different ways that they explain. The student in this case introduced the topic in a manner that follows generally from the task, and they demonstrate a literal comprehension of the texts. The topic is partially developed with some textual evidence, and they exhibit some attempted organization and inconsistently link the ideas using words and phrases. The response demonstrates emerging command of conventions with some errors that may hinder comprehension. Guide paper 7 is a 1. Each story has facts, and one of the same facts are coniferous trees have wax on their leaves so snow slips right off, and one of the myths from the first stories is evergreen trees don't lose their wings because they were good to the bird. It's because coniferous trees have adapted to the weather. This is scored as a 1. The response introduces a topic in a manner that follows generally from the task, but demonstrates a little understanding of the texts. The ideas are developed using minimal evidence, and the response exhibits a little attempted organization and lacks the linking words to connect ideas. There's no concluding statement. The student does exhibit emerging command of conventions with some errors that may hinder comprehension, so that's a little bit stronger, but overall the holistic score is a 1 for this paper. Guide paper 8 is a level 1. The student writes, the myth is they are telling you about how trees are different than other trees. The fiction is where the trees talk, the bird talks. The evergreens keep their leaves all year long because for our Christmas trees and for our air. In this case, the student introduces a topic in a manner that follows generally from the task, but the student demonstrates very little understanding of the texts. The student attempts to use evidence, but the evidence is generally irrelevant, talking about Christmas trees and air. The response exhibits a little attempt at organization and doesn't provide a concluding statement. The response demonstrates a lack of command of conventions with frequent errors that hinder comprehension and make it pretty hard to read. Guide paper 9 is scored as a 0. The birds have flown to the south, and a bird broke in its wing, and he found a forest that was warm and cozy. It was scored as 0 because the student demonstrated a lack of comprehension of the task, and though the student demonstrated an attempt to use evidence, it was largely irrelevant. The response exhibits no evidence of organization or the use of linking words. The response uses imprecise language and doesn't provide a concluding statement, and the response demonstrates a lack of command of conventions with frequent errors that hinder comprehension. The final guide paper is paper 10. The student writes, they grew brave and they have to stay for spring. Clearly, this student has demonstrated a lack of comprehension of the task and the text. There's no evidence of organization. The language is minimal, so the assessment of conventions is unreliable. There's really nothing there to read. Again, this one is scored as a 0.